He was the heartfelt action hero. On camera, she was the voice of a music icon who rescued a drowning child. The most underappreciated romance in Hollywood was that between Robert Urich and Heather Menzies. However, nobody discusses how it ended. The cancer that destroyed their entire universe. The consecutive calamities. The death that took place precisely 15 years later. However, these weren't mere coincidences, even down to the minute. It's nearly impossible to accept the cruelty of what actually happened to Robert and Heather. According to them, Robert Urich has 15 different TV programs, more than any other starring male in history. He would become a legend for that reason alone, but his tale was more complex than that. It was about his transition from action star to dramatic lead and how he continued to surprise people. After that, it was to a well-known documentary host and a Broadway vocalist. Actors are typically boxed in. Every mold was broken by Robert. He began as an Ohio football player. Talent, charisma, and one significant buddy, Burt Reynolds, are all that are needed, no fancy connections. Early on, Burt had faith in him and assisted him in making his first significant shot. In 1975, such shot was made with SW8. Robert portrayed a gruff but likable police officer named Officer Jim Street. The performance was short-lived. Millions of households saw his face, but it was cancelled in 1976 due to excessive violence. All of a sudden, he was a rising star rather than just a person with potential. Then Vega arrived. Robert portrayed Dan Tana, a stylish private investigator in Las Vegas, from 1978 until 1981. It was a cultural moment as well as a hit. He navigated the neon streets in a crimson 1957 Ford Thunderbird, solving crimes while wearing a suit and grinning. By the way, that vehicle took the place of a yellow Corvette that the pilot had burned. Like Robert, that red T-Bird became iconic. He received 2 Golden Globe nominations for the performance. More significantly, it turned him into a symbol, slick, intelligent, and articulate. He was the face of primetime drama for a spell. Urich didn't stop there, though. Few people have ever dominated television like he did for the next 30 years. 15 prominent roles across all genres. He played a naive tennis pro in a comic soap opera. In Gavilan, he dealt with espionage. In the mid-1990s, he even starred in The Lazarus Man, a Western. He appeared on screen nearly constantly between 1973 and 2001. He wasn't coasting, either. He continued to try new things, change directions, and take chances. Being a one-note star wasn't enough for him. He desired to do everything. Then Spencer arrived for the job. This was no ordinary detective series. It generated an estimated $50 million for the state of Massachusetts during its 1985 to 1988 run. The show's gritty, genuine atmosphere came from the cost of filming on location in Boston. The winters were harsh. Despite the limited funds, Robert managed to make it work. He had a strong rapport with co-star Avery Brooks, who portrayed the rugged and enigmatic Hawk. The show wasn't about gunfights and automobile chases. It was about morality, justice, and doing the right thing even when it was painful. And it was adored by fans. Later, he reprised his role as Spencer in 4 television-based films, demonstrating the character's and Robert's enduring appeal. However, he did something unexpected just when everyone believed they understood him. He became National Geographic Explorer's face. He presented the program, which alternated between TBS, CNBC, and MSNBC, from 1988 to 1995. As he described ancient civilizations and deep marine mysteries, his voice became the sound of astonishment. He meant what he was reading, not just a script. His narration of U-boats' terror on our shores earned him an Emmy in 1992 and a Cable Ace Award in 1993. In addition, he received another Cable Ace for hosting On Assignment. These gigs weren't disposable. These were respected, somber shows. Robert also demonstrated his range. He could have remained a legend even if he had stopped there. However, there was still another act. Robert made his Broadway debut in 2000 while he was suffering synovial cell sarcoma, an aggressive and uncommon illness that he had been battling since 1996. From January 5 to February 13 in Chicago, he performed as Billy Flynn. This was the big stage, but he had previously performed the role on tour in places like Detroit and Washington, D.C. He did a fantastic job at the Schubert Theater. The fact that he could really sing, as well as his performance astounded the audience. And there was more. He stepped out on stage with a sparkle in his eye, as his wife subsequently remarked. He illuminated the room despite the fatigue and cancer. On December 3, 1949, Heather Menzies was born in Toronto to Scottish parents who had escaped the devastation of post-World War II Britain. As a struggling artist seeking a new beginning, her father encountered difficulties in Canada. They were desperate, homeless, and broke. Heather learned something from her challenging immigrant past that Hollywood couldn't impart: grit. Heather had already lived in 4 places in 2 countries by the time she was 14. Southern California, Miami, London, and Vancouver. The family moved and packed up every time her father's art profession faltered. Heather had to quickly learn how to establish friends, adjust to new educational systems, and pick up new accents. It was draining. But she was able to adjust because of all that volatility. She was already accustomed to changing who she was, which might be useful in the future. Then, when Heather was just 14 years old and had no prior acting experience, she went to a casting call that would alter her life. The Sound of Music had hundreds of girls try out. The majority have years of training, agents, and resumes. Although Heather's record only included 1 lost TV show, she did have something else. She was authentic. Her inherent charisma was evident. She was cast as Louisa Von Trapp without any further explanation. Glamorous singing in the Alps wasn't the only aspect of the shoot. The movie almost devolved into tragedy because of one horrific scene. The boat overturned during the rowboat scene. Kim Carruth, Heather's 5-year-old co-star who portrayed young Gretel, was unable of swimming. She was hospitalized twice. They had cameras rolling. Julie Andrews made a mistake. Heather didn't freeze, but the rest of the crew did. She saved Kim's life by swimming directly to her and pulling her up. Kim became ill after ingesting so much water, and she subsequently became afraid of swimming for the rest of her life. However, the scene remained in the film. Additionally, what you see on screen is authentic. Heather saves her co-star. The Sound of Music was a huge smash when it came out on March 2, 1965. By 1966, it had earned 5 Oscars and was the highest-grossing movie ever. It sold 283 million tickets and earned $286 million globally. In 29 countries, it was the top-grossing film. Then Heather Menzies appeared. The modest immigrant girl used to be well-known everywhere. Heather didn't want to be stuck in time like adorable little Louisa, even though she was only 15. She therefore took a severe action in 1973. In the tender trap spread, she posed naked for Playboy. The message was obvious, but the name was a playful homage to her musical heritage. She was no longer a youngster. The public was stunned. She had played the naive teenager in a family movie only 8 years prior. Even if it meant offending those who still thought of her as Louisa, she was now taking charge of her image. She starred in one of the decade's most bizarre horror movies that same year. She portrayed Christina, a crazy scientist's daughter who turns humans into snakes. It was strange, expensive, and teeming with actual snakes. Heather, however, did not recoil. She was described by critics as charming and endearing. She was attempting to shine, not fade, even in such a strange job. She scored a big TV part in 1977 in Logan's Run, when she played Jessica 6 in a sci-fi setting where people were hunted down at 30. Even though the show only had 14 episodes, Heather stood out for her rebellious persona and suggestive attire. She looked too risque for a children's show, CBS executives said in a panic at one point. Heather remained firm even though her dress had to be changed to include stockings and pink briefs. She was now this person. Her most successful career move to date was acting in the legendary horror smash Piranha, which was produced by B-movie maestro Roger Corman in 1978. Despite having a budget of just over $700,000, the movie grossed $16 million. Steven Spielberg even praised it, and Universal's lawsuit was discreetly abandoned. The action was driven by Heather's character, Maggie McEwen, a fearless skip racer. Her performance helped make Piranha a classic, and she was able to hold her own against a group of horror regulars. In a canned hash commercial, Robert Urich and Heather Menzies pretended to be married. Doesn't it sound absurd? However, that scene on the set in 1974 permanently altered their lives. At the age of 25, Heather Menzies was recently divorced and attempting to move on after a brief but unsuccessful marriage. At the age of 28, Robert Urich was attractive, in shape, and gaining popularity in Hollywood. Something sparked while they were acting out a married couple in a basic Libby's commercial. It was more than a performance. The connection was so genuine that it persisted even after the cameras stopped recording. Pretending to be in love one day swiftly evolved into something far more serious. It was more than a job. It was the beginning of a romantic tale that would endure for 27 years. Nor was Robert some failing performer. He was on the verge of becoming famous. He became a household name when SW8 aired on television screens across America in 1975, just a year later. Fans adored him for his portrayal of Officer Jim Street, the gruff guy with heart. However, it wasn't a coincidence. To suit the action hero stereotype, Robert had put a lot of effort into changing his appearance, gaining 220 pounds of solid muscle instead of his original 180 pounds. He had the right friends, the right appearance, and the perfect charm. Burt Reynolds was even instrumental in helping him obtain his big break. Reynolds persuaded Aaron Spelling, the producer, to try Robert. Spelling was sold after just one audition. Robert Urich was on his way in an instant. Meanwhile, Heather was experiencing a pivotal moment of her own. She had once had great fame. She portrayed Louisa Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, one of the most famous movies ever made, when she was just 15 years old. However, childhood celebrity is short-lived. She was attempting to make the difficult transition from kid star to serious actress at the time she met Robert. In addition, she was recovering from a 4-year marriage that started when she was just 20 years old. Additionally, Robert had previously been married to Barbara Rucker, a college sweetheart. Although that marriage ended amicably, it made him wary. He married Heather a little more than a year after they first met, which is why it was so unexpected and possibly even risky. The wedding took place on November 21, 1975. Quick? Of course. However, the same thing was said by everyone who knew them. It felt natural. Only a few weeks after meeting Heather, Robert confided in his buddies that he knew she was the one. It wasn't Hollywood jargon either. It was authentic. It wasn't a passing romance, but it burned brightly. It was the special kind of connection that is rare, particularly in the entertainment industry. They became into a unique kind of Hollywood power couple that didn't need any controversy. Heather left a legacy in movies. Robert was rising to fame on television. By 1978, he was nominated for 2 Golden Globes and received the lead part in Vaguth, a sleek crime drama that ran for 3 years. It was at that point that they truly became well-known, both individually and collectively. They were adored by photographers. Not only did they look fantastic together, but magazine covers followed. It was the way they exchanged glances. They had no brand to sell. All they were doing was falling in love. Robert wasn't afraid to express it either. He made a conscious effort to include Heather in his universe from the start. She made appearances in 3 Vago episodes. He subsequently secured her a role in Spencer for Hire. However, it went beyond simply assigning woman responsibilities. He wanted to share his life. Their success was his success. Additionally, Robert fully supported Heather's decision to put her family first and slow down her acting career. In a field where ego typically prevails, such level of support was practically unheard of. Heather discovered she was expecting a child in 1975, shortly after getting married. The news made her and Robert happy, and they weren't even trying. Heather later remarked, "We were ecstatic, but our joy didn't last. The baby was lost by her." Not only was the heartbreak unbearable, but it continued. Heather had repeated miscarriages. One after the other, 3 pregnancies, 3 losses. One after the other tore at them a bit more. What started out as hope swiftly evolved into a grieving routine. Friends started to fear that the couple would not make it through the emotional toll. Additionally, both of their careers were booming at the same time as all of this. Behind the scenes, their world was collapsing, even though they were living in Hollywood. Something had to change after the 3rd miscarriage. Heather and Robert had to make a tough choice. Adoption wasn't an easy solution. They had to endure a drawn-out procedure and were put on a waiting list. However, in 1978, they finally welcomed Ryan, their first child. Emily followed in 1980, and Allison followed considerably later in 1998. 20 years. It wasn't a coincidence. Their goal was to provide every child with the undivided attention they were due. Ryan went on to become a physician, centered on viral illnesses. He previously remarked, "Maybe I can help someone else, but I went into medicine because I couldn't help my dad medically." Emily became a nurse and is currently employed in an emergency room in Ontario. Perhaps as a result of seeing their father struggle so valiantly to survive, each of their children discovered a way to heal. Heather sacrificed something of her own. She had been on the rise. Jessica 6 in Logan's Run and Louisa in The Sound of Music. She was well-known, booked, and busy. However, she took a back seat when they adopted. Women leaving like that was not what Hollywood expected. However, she did. She only made a few appearances after 1979. A few Vega episodes, a cameo on T.J. Hooker, the movie Endangered Species, and then essentially nothing. She sacrificed it to provide a secure home for her kids. Robert shattered the mold as well. He was not the type of parent who left his children in the care of nannies while he remained on set. With 15 series throughout a 30-year career, he was one of the busiest TV actors, but he made sure to show up. There was a provision in Spencer's contract that allowed him to go across the country anytime Emily needed to go to the doctor. In the 1980s, that was uncommon, almost unheard of. Connecting was more important to him as a parent than simply being present. Robert refrained from yelling at Ryan when he misbehaved. He asked him what was happening as they sat side by side on the floor, looking at each other. Instead of punishing, he attempted to understand. And just 2 days before he passed away, Robert played with his youngest child, Allison, on the floor despite the fact that the cancer had taken almost all of his strength. But in August 1996, everything was different. The physicians discovered something when Robert went in for a routine examination. It turned out to be synovial sarcoma, an uncommon and deadly malignancy that damages the soft tissue around the joints. Those under 30 are more likely to have it. Robert was 49. His groin was where the malignancy was. It would be cruel treatment. Radiation, chemotherapy, and several surgeries. And it couldn't have come at a worse time. He was in the best physical condition of his life and had recently debuted a new series called The Lazarus Man. Hollywood was deeply affected by the diagnosis. It was a successful show. And there were already plans for a second season. However, Castle Rock Entertainment canceled the show a few weeks after the announcement. Everyone was taken by surprise by the decision. Out of the 22 episodes, only 20 had been shown. 2 completed episodes remained unfinished. The cancellation was even more stunning because TNT had previously committed to renewing the show. He began receiving chemotherapy and radiation therapy in July 1996, and the treatment lasted for 6 grueling months. Before the actual punishment started, they pumped potassium, bicarbonate, and antiemetic medications into his chest every morning at 5:45 a.m. The 9-day regimens of chemotherapy lasted 4 hours each day. Robert claimed that after the 6th day, he felt as though the chemicals in the pool were blazing in his veins. He made an effort to divert his attention, but the agony and nausea were unavoidable. The intensity of the radiation was significantly higher. In an effort to avoid destroying everything else, they used lead templates to direct tens of millions of rads, thousands of times more powerful than a typical X-ray, at the cancer in his groin. He lost all of his hair by February 1997. The disease never left him, and he was having trouble breathing. He was battling more than simply cancer. He was struggling to live through the treatment. After that, a miracle occurred. Whatever remained of the tumor was removed by doctors in October 1997. However, nothing was found when they opened him up. Not a single tumor, malignancy, or dead tissue. It seemed as though the illness had never been. Robert was taken aback. "I began to question whether I ever had it," he added. He had a 5% risk of relapsing, according to the doctors. There was genuine hope for the first time in years. Robert was deemed cancer-free by 1998. He was appointed the American Cancer Society's national spokesperson. "It's part of my deal with God to spread the word that it is survivable," he informed the Globe. He went back to work. 2 years after joining the cast of Love Boat and The Next Wave, he realized a lifelong desire. "It felt like the nightmare was finally over when I was in Chicago, performing as Billy Flynn on Broadway. They thought they had overcome the odds," according to Robert and his wife Heather. They began making plans for the future after doctors assured them of a 95% cure rate. He gave cancer research all $125,000 of his Who Wants to Be a Millionaire earnings. In order to fund sarcoma research at the University of Michigan, he and Heather established the Urich Fund. He went around the nation urging people to get checked as soon as possible. He even started writing An Extraordinary Life, his book. The story didn't end in success, even though it appeared like it would for a change. November 2001, the cancer came back. There were new lumps. Doctors initially believed that a new medication could manage it, but they were mistaken. The illness was stronger, faster, and much more aggressive this time. The tumor had been local at first. This one had gone viral. There were no more opportunities, no treatment, and no surgery. The NBC sitcom Emerald, Robert's last project, was nearing completion. As the illness launched its last attack, his acting career came to an end. He and Heather had thought they were safe. After rebuilding their lives, everything was falling apart once more. This time, however, they were aware of the story's conclusion. Robert Urich passed away at Los Robles Regional Medical Center in California on April 16, 2002, at 7:22 p.m. He was 55. He was accompanied by Heather and their 3 adopted children, Ryan, 24, Emily, 22, and Allison, 4. A few days prior, he had been admitted to the hospital due to respiratory issues. In an attempt to leave anything behind, he continued to write on his memoirs even in his last weeks. His last television film, Night of the Wolf, had screened on national television the night before he passed away. Heather became a widow at the age of 52. 27 years had passed since their marriage. She had supported him during every operation, chemotherapy session, and terrifying time. They had miscarried and lost children. Through adoption, they had created a family. She was now forced to face the world by herself. She was strong despite her immense pain. 3 days later, around 1,000 people gathered to bid farewell at North Hollywood's St. Charles Borromeo Church. Tom Selleck, Gavin MacLeod, and Tony Danza were among the celebrities who gathered to honor him. "It's sad because of who Bob is and was," Selleck told reporters. "These individuals are brought out by genuine relationship." Outside, among flowers, was a black and white photograph of Robert. No one was forgetting the man who had formerly claimed the record for most television series appearances, 15. Heather continued. They had begun having fun together even before Robert passed away. Now, though, she made it into something more. The Robert Urich Foundation was established by her. She preferred a more active approach. More activities, greater awareness, and more funding for studies. "I get energy from spearheading the foundation," she stated. "It's a lot like all the precious days I had with Robert." She reared their kids. She continued to work. she found meaning in her suffering. Glioblastoma multiforme, one of the most aggressive and fatal brain malignancies known to science, was diagnosed in November 2017 in Heather Menzies Urich, who had previously danced across screens as Louisa Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. The cruelest section was 68. This occurred precisely 15 years after her husband, actor Robert Urich, passed away from cancer in 2002. Heather had been fighting cancer for the past 10.5 years. Through the Robert Urich Foundation, she raised funds, provided patient care, and did everything in her power to spare other families from going through what her family had. It was her time now, though. She had been targeted by the illness she had been battling. 4 weeks before to her passing, she received the diagnosis. There was no time for lengthy farewells or preparation. For 6 years, Robert had fought against cancer. They gained time and hope from his battle. The opposite was true of Heather's deterioration. There is no waiting for glioblastoma. It takes longer and spreads more quickly. Reporters were informed by her son, Ryan Urich, that her health rapidly deteriorated following the diagnosis. There were no last-minute clinical trials or treatment windows. No opportunity to plan the kind of assistance she had dedicated her life to providing. This was particularly difficult to witness for those who knew her. Actress Heather was more than that. She was a mother, a ballerina, and a lady who embraced every moment of life. But within a few days, her energy diminished, her voice grew softer, and she disappeared. She hardly had time to say farewell to her Hollywood friends, some of whom had known her for decades. On Christmas Eve, she passed away. On December 24, 2017, precisely at 7:22 p.m. She was with her 3 kids at the family home in Frankfort, Ontario. Later, Ryan claimed she wasn't in any pain. She had really had enough of fighting the inevitable for almost 4 weeks. The scene had a serene yet meaningful feel. Christmas Eve is a time for warmth, family, and hope-holding. However, for them, that was the moment they lost her for good. It was a lingering reminder of Robert's death. His death occurred on April 16, 2002. Exactly 15 years and 8 months later, Heather died. They were aware of the symmetry in their losses, and more suffering was in store. Charmian Carr, who played Liesl, had passed away from the Sound of Music family in September 2016, just over a year ago. Another sister of Von Trapp had left. The movie's fans were devastated. It was the last bow made by the young girl who had sang so long farewell. Ryan's statement was honest and very intimate. He didn't simply declare her dead. He described everything that transpired, including the exact moment. He claimed that his mother was pain-free. However, she knew when to let go after leading such an active and passionate life. That decision was hers. She passed away with dignity rather than in terror or struggle. Ryan also ensured that her true identity was remembered. Louisa Von Trapp is not the only one. She had been a fighter, an actor, a dancer, and she had decided to dedicate her years to serving others. She never lost that grace, even in the end.